You're not part of the family, so just stick to being a maid. I was invited to a celebration for my brother-in-law's son. But since I was not considered family, I was told not to sit with them. A daughter-in-law who can't have children is just useless. That wasn't the first time my mother-in-law had blamed me for not having children. But what followed was an unexpected truth. My name is Gina, and I'm 30 years old. Even after getting married, I continued to work as a company employee. My husband is 33, and we have been married for 4 years, but we don't have children. We were not actively trying for a baby. But there was a time when we were conscious about starting a family, yet it hasn't happened yet. I wondered if there was a problem, and after checking, it turned out that the issue was with my husband, making it difficult for us to conceive. He asked me not to tell his parents that he was the reason we couldn't have children. After further discussions, we decided not to seek treatment and to wait for nature to take its course. The chances are slim, so it's likely that it will just be the two of us forever. There will come a time when we'll be asked to find out why we can't conceive and to share the results. But when that happens, we'll think about it then. Little did I know, this decision would start a hellish chapter in my life. My mother-in-law, in her late 50s, believes the reason we can't have children is because of me. She tells me to quit my job and focus on getting pregnant, and accuses me of refusing to be intimate with my husband, even intruding into our personal affairs. That's when the insults began. Via text, she blames me for not being able to have children, calling me a useless daughter-in-law, and accusing me of embarrassing her son. At first, I replied with a "I'm sorry." But as the frequency of these messages increased, I stopped responding, and then she would call. The content was the same, but I could sense malice in her voice. She would call when my husband was not around, not as frequently as she texted. But her voice lingered painfully in my ears. Despite this, I only meet her about twice a year, so I chose to endure. However, gradually, the stress began to manifest physically. One day, my nephew, the son of my brother-in-law, won a painting competition. And the celebration was held at the in-laws' house. As all the relatives were gathering, we had no choice but to attend. It takes 2 hours by car to get to their house. I started to feel pain in various parts of my body, and being in the car for 2 hours was honestly tough. The prospect of meeting my mother-in-law also added to my anxiety. I would have preferred not to go, but my relationship with my brother-in-law and his wife is good. And I actually find their son adorable, and both my husband and I dote on him. I decided to go, thinking that if we took turns driving, it might be manageable. But at the last minute, he couldn't join me because of work. I drove alone, and he would join later using public transport. I told him I would wait until his work was finished. But he insisted it would be inappropriate for both of us to be late to such an occasion. Lacking manners as adults, so I reluctantly went alone at the appointed time. When I arrived at the in-laws' house at the designated time, none of the other relatives had yet arrived, and I was the first one there. However, as soon as my mother-in-law saw me, she snapped, "You're late." When I entered, I saw that nothing had been prepared for the celebration. Only the materials that seemed to be used for it were left unattended. "Hurry up and get ready. We're running out of time." Shocked by her cold words, I asked her to repeat herself. "It's your job, isn't it? A daughter-in-law isn't a guest, so get to it right away." It was as if she had left everything for me to do. Furthermore, my mother-in-law said, "After being a homemaker for 4 years, you should know just by looking at the ingredients what to make, right? Even a daughter-in-law who can't have children should at least know the child's favorite foods. Shouldn't she?" She continued her relentless attacks on my inability to have children. Despite my resistance, I lacked the strength to fight back and began preparing in silence. As the preparations neared completion, relatives began to gather at the in-laws' house. My brother-in-law and his son arrived around the same time, and the son came into the kitchen. When he asked what I was making, I replied that it was something he liked, and he smiled happily. Seeing his smile alleviated some of the pain from my mother-in-law's harsh treatment. However, my brother-in-law's wife was nowhere to be seen. Considering my mother-in-law's personality, it is surprising she hasn't complained about the eldest son's wife not showing her face at a family gathering. Especially since today is her own son's celebration. I couldn't help but wonder why my sister-in-law was missing. Almost all the preparations were done, and most of the relatives had arrived. Only my husband and sister-in-law were missing, so my mother-in-law suggested we start eating. I naturally went to sit in an empty spot. However, my action was immediately stopped by my mother-in-law's comment. "What are you trying to rest for, Gina? If you leave, who will serve the food? Hurry, don't let us run out of drinks or food." I was told to ensure that food and drinks didn't run out. Furthermore, I was instructed to respond to requests for specific dishes as needed and to serve dessert at the right time. Was there even a dessert? Could it be that I am expected to make that too? Preparing dessert involves various steps and takes time. Am I supposed to do that now? You mean you haven't prepared it? What a disappointing daughter-in-law. Even with such harsh words, I had no choice but to obey her. If I protested here, she would undoubtedly claim in front of all the relatives gathered that it was my fault for not having children. I went back to the kitchen, started preparing the dessert, kept adding to the dishes, and occasionally went around serving drinks. Then, a few of the relatives began to say, "It seems unfair to rely solely on Gina." And a few women started to get up. But my mother-in-law sharply stopped them. "It's fine, Gina is useless except for these kinds of things." Another relative asked her what she meant by useless. "Isn't it obvious? A daughter-in-law who can't have children. She's just a burden." The room went silent for a moment. That made her next words echo even louder. "A daughter-in-law who can't produce children is useless. She's not part of the family, just a nuisance." I knew she was saying this because she understood I couldn't retaliate. I couldn't make a big scene there. I managed to contain my desire to argue back. But it seemed I was glaring at my mother-in-law unconsciously. So scary. "What a look you're giving me, you. I'm just stating the truth. In our family, Gina, you are the only daughter-in-law who hasn't given birth." She sneered as she repeated, "Useless, useless." One of the relatives, sensing a heated situation might arise, took my brother-in-law's son to another room. I thought it couldn't be shown in front of the children. But in front of the adults, my competitive spirit grew a bit. Just then, my husband, having finished work, arrived. He entered with a cheerful apology for being late. But he sensed the atmosphere was unusually heavy. He whispered to me at my side. I told him about what my mother-in-law had done. The other relatives were there, and knowing I wasn't exaggerating, no one interrupted. After hearing everything, my husband seemed to become somewhat supportive of me. He might even admit that he was the cause. After listening, he turned to my mother-in-law and exploded, saying she had gone too far, that there were things that should and shouldn't be said. My mother-in-law looked displeased but didn't seem to plan on arguing back against my husband. This might keep her quiet for a while. I was hopeful, but the next words from my husband felt like a betrayal. In a whisper that only I could hear, he said, "Well, infertility is a fact, after all. Try to understand the feelings of a mother who cannot hold a grandchild from her own son. Infertility is indeed a fact. But even though the cause lies with him." He spoke as if it was someone else's issue, prompting me to quietly counter. "The cause of infertility is you, isn't it? Why should I endure unreasonable accusations when it's not my fault? If you're going to go that far, say it yourself that the cause of infertility is yours." No, that's a bit. Well, as a man, things like dignity and position. You understand that, right, Gina? Since you work and understand a man's position. His voice was strained, and his demeanor was flustered as he argued. Furthermore, he shifted the blame shockingly. After all, isn't pregnancy a woman's job? Don't just blame me without doing your part as a woman. His clear assertion was overheard by my mother-in-law, who seized the opportunity to retaliate. "I'm blaming my son because you're incompetent. What kind of daughter-in-law are you? I've never seen a daughter-in-law as shameless and audacious as you." She insulted me excessively. Amidst this, no relative dared to oppose her, but my brother-in-law spoke up. "Enough is enough." I was surprised that someone known for his mild manners could shout with such authority. "And not only did you torment my wife, but you've been harassing Gina too. You haven't learned your lesson from bullying your daughters-in-law." I had wondered why my sister-in-law wasn't at this gathering, and now I understood. When I was dating my husband, my brother-in-law and his wife were living in the family home. However, the next time I visited, the brother-in-law's family was gone. And I was told by my husband that they had moved due to my brother-in-law's circumstances. I thought my husband and I would end up living with my mother-in-law. But because of my husband's work, we didn't discuss living together and settled in a new home 2 hours away by car. At this gathering, my brother-in-law spilled the beans about what happened to their family. They had gotten pregnant soon after marrying, and my mother-in-law was thrilled. However, when a girl was born, her attitude changed dramatically. "A girl means nothing. If you're the wife of the eldest son, you should give birth to a boy. A daughter-in-law's worth is measured by her ability to have boys. Having a girl is a waste, as she'll just end up in another man's house, so why waste money raising her? You're a daughter-in-law, so you should understand a woman's role, right?" Under the pressure of these imposed values, my sister-in-law became mentally unstable. The doctor advised her to start by distancing herself from the cause of her stress. Seeing the severity of the situation, my brother-in-law reached his limit and decided to leave the family home. Some of the female relatives looked down, unwilling to even look at my mother-in-law. Perhaps they knew my sister-in-law was being mistreated in this home. Witnessing yet unable to speak out against my mother-in-law's significant presence, the reality of the long-standing abuse was exposed by my brother-in-law. And my mother-in-law looked at him as if he had said something unnecessary. But he seemed unfazed and said to me, "Gina, you can go home now. There's no point in enduring this anymore." My husband protested, telling him not to decide on his own. But when accused of not defending me, he fell silent. I handed the car keys to my husband and decided to return home using public transport. I turned my back, nodding briefly to the relatives. Then my brother-in-law approached and whispered in my ear, "Gina, you should take some time to think about the future." It was as if he was saying there was no need to endure anymore. And I left the family home feeling utterly refreshed, thinking I would be freed from all the social constraints. I returned home before my husband and packed my bags. Of course, I didn't forget to leave a divorce notice in place of a letter. My husband seemed a bit panicked when he saw the divorce papers. He contacted me immediately, but started saying, "Don't make a big deal out of a mother's occasional nagging." I had endured daily calls and messages demanding grandchildren, and insulting me for not being able to conceive. Enduring all that only to be dismissed as not part of the family. How could I continue as a family when, hearing this, my husband sided with my mother-in-law and treated me as the villain? My resolve will never change, so I told him to sign the divorce papers quickly and hung up. My husband didn't understand why I was so adamant, and kept sending messages and calling like a broken record. Of course, I ignored them all. He should have taken a hint from the unread messages. After hearing that I wanted a divorce, my brother-in-law and his wife helped find a place for me to stay. They also helped in many other ways. It seems they too had cut ties with my mother-in-law after the incident at the celebration. They stopped sending money home along with severing ties. My mother-in-law was unemployed and not yet of pension age, relying on her sons for financial support. While she had some savings, maintaining her lifestyle without their support would be challenging. Since my husband earned less than I did, his salary alone wouldn't suffice for both living expenses and supporting his mother. The boasting about being able to send money home was possible, because I supported our living with my salary. If our divorce was finalized, my husband wouldn't be able to support his mother's lifestyle with his own salary. Soon after we separated, the impact became evident. My mother-in-law, cut off from her son's financial support, was forced to reduce her standard of living. Accustomed to anything but frugality, she couldn't manage a modest lifestyle. Overcome by her desires, she accumulated debt. And it seemed only a matter of time before she lost her house and land used as collateral. My husband also struggled financially. Apparently, my mother-in-law had asked him for money several times. Unable to give what he didn't have, their mother-son relationship became quite precarious. While he was reluctant to agree to the divorce, things settled surprisingly quickly once I hired a lawyer. This incident revealed my ex-husband's vulnerability to authority. Had I known this sooner, I might have resolved many things from different angles. What was the point of all that needless endurance? Now, I'm enjoying a carefree life without any need for patience. Since I began thinking there was no need for endurance, my health, which had suffered under the strain of dealing with my mother-in-law, has shown signs of recovery. While the difficulty in conceiving was partly due to my husband, the main factor was my mother-in-law. I look forward to meeting someone with whom I can be family under any circumstances. But for now, I'm enjoying my newfound freedom a bit longer.